right, so I kind of gave away mine already. So I want to show you this real quick. My favorite Christmas movie is The Santa Claus. Do we have any Santa Claus fans around here? All right, so you love it. Tim Allen, like, you remember when he looks in the mirror and he immediately grows a beard? Do you remember this? And I love now that most of the time, like in December, he'll start tweeting out and he'll start growing a beard. Have you seen this? And he's like, now it's time for me to, whatever. And then it also took me about 11 years to figure out that they spelled Claus differently, but I'm dumb. So anyway, Santa Claus is one of my favorite movies. Now, what's so funny about this movie, this is why I love it so much, even as a kid, when you look at the Santa Claus, you have this beautiful storyline. You have all of these things that are going on. But at the end of the movie, do you remember this? Not to ruin it. Has anybody not seen this movie before? Well, it's too late. It's like 20 years old. We're gonna end it. The end of the movie, do you remember this? When he comes and then he gives the gifts that his ex-wife and her new husband didn't get his kids. Do you remember this? And the guy who's the psychologist, I forget his name, gets a weenie whistle. Do you remember this? I didn't plan on saying that out loud, but he gets a weenie whistle thing, and then he in front of everybody, he's has this moment where he's for the first time in years in awe and wonder, he blows into this weenie whistle, and then Scott Calvin. I've just said weenie whistle so many times, but he just has this moment where he just he for the first time experiences wonder and beauty and all of this in the middle of the movie. And if you're watching it, it's so funny because the backstory is you have a bunch of adults who got into the Christmas season and they just lost all awe, all of their wonder, every bit of it, and they come now into the Christmas season as adults as people who are well equipped to explain all of the beauty away. And I love it. And I love because at the end of the movie, you have this child who talks about the way that things actually are, and nobody believes him. They take him to the principal, all this stuff happens. And in the midst of it are a group of adults who are so well equipped to not experience the beauty and the power and the wonder that's connected to this Christmas season. Now, I think this is true of most of us. In fact, when you think about the movie, part of the reason that it's so nostalgic to see the Santa Claus movie is that by the time we hit, 17, 18, 19 years old, maybe for many of us younger than that, there's something inside of us that begins to experience life in a way where some of the big things, some of the awe and wonder sort of things, they just begin to evaporate. And then when you go on top of that, now, and this was different than when I was growing up. I grew up with a little flip phone from Verizon. You remember the Razor phone? Do you remember this? I had internet, but it was to play a little worm game that just did all this stuff, But what's interesting now is as you get into a world that's so deeply connected like we are, not only do we have this moment where we almost grow out of awe and wonder, but now it happens so much earlier because anything that you've ever wanted to see, you could probably see in the device that's in your pocket. And anything that you wanted to learn about or read is just right there. In fact, you want to go see a concert, it's right there in your device. You want to go experience something else, you can put on an Oculus and almost be there. And anybody ever done the Oculus thing? This is kind of fun for me. Anybody ever done that? I did it a few months back for the first time, and I did the Star Wars game. And I remember when Darth Vader came towards me, and I legit got a little bit afraid, You can experience things now, even in the digital world, that you couldn't experience earlier, and now it's kind of shaping the way that we see the world and experience awe and wonder. And then you take all of that, and then you add just living and the difficulty at times and the suffering and pain that sometimes we experience. And there's something about us as we get older that moves towards trying to find almost this internal safety when it comes to the things that are beyond our grasp or beyond essentially beyond us. And this is true spiritually as well. Now, I'll put it in my notes. I said it this way. There's something for us that it tends to move towards some version of finding safety and settling with this control thing. You stop dreaming to the point beyond things that you can't make happen for yourself. Right? Now, there's something about you that you could dream about a future job, but at the same time, you're going to dream about a future job within the context of how much of it you can do on your own. A lot of us dream about relationships this way, right? Some people in the room that are single, you dream about a future relationship, and at the same time, you also go, how do I make that happen? What do I need to do to make that happen? Some of those things are true, but at the end of the day, there's also a component that also probably feels a little bit outside of your control. And when it comes to those of us in the room who are followers of Jesus, or those of us in the room who pray, this is also true of the way that we pray and interact with God. My 5-year-old son probably has an easier time praying for things that are outside of his control than I do because he experiences wonder everywhere he goes. We went to Mellow Mushroom the other day, and there's that Hulk thing. Do you remember that? It's 9-foot tall Hulk, and he's like, this is real. You know what I mean? And I looked at him like, Daddy can beat him up. And he goes, no, you can't. And that was it. That was it. Like there's a little bit of him just experiencing awe wherever he goes. It's different. Like we pray at night together, and I love this. I'll tuck them in at night, and one of my favorite things to do is I love praying with them because it probably it affects me more than it probably even affects them. And he and my daughter Eleanor, so he's 5, she's 3, and he'll just pray the biggest prayers. Like there's a kid at his school who was mean to him the other day, and I love this. He goes, God, I ask that you would just change his heart, and he would do things. He talked about how he would do things differently, and I just sat there going, I don't remember the last time that I prayed, and I probably should pray more, that God would change somebody's heart to that level, where they would just immediately stop. And he goes, I know you can do that. And then he pulled up his little, Paw Patrol sheets and went to bed. I love that he just automatically assumes that there are things that aren't in his control and things that God can do. Now, when I dream or I pray or I experience the world and only things that I can control, there's always a lid to the things that I can lean into and that I can probably even experience in the world. Now, there's a safety in doing this because when you dream of things that only you can control, then it almost feels like you have the power to make all of it happen. And I think you have the power to make a lot of things happen in your life. But at the end of the day, that's also like this, almost like closing off to anything that is beyond you to get involved in the circumstances as well. And I think a lot of times what it does is there's also like a safety in settling for smaller things. Now, some of you may not be like this, but a lot of us, if you're like me, I got just cynical enough to stop praying big prayers at a certain point in my life. I got just cynical enough to still be a person who's a follower of Jesus and at the same time act as if Jesus wasn't active in my life and in the world. And what I felt like, and again, you might be different than me, and again, I know that all of you are probably better humans than I am, but for me, what I would do is I was like, how do I make sure that I protect my emotions enough in case God doesn't interact with me or the world the way that I think he should? And so I would pray things that were smaller because I felt like it was just easier for it to happen that way. The other part that's really honest, and again, this is just me, I felt like if I could lower my expectations, it would be easier for God to meet my expectations, right? It's probably true of some of us in the room that lowered expectations, right, often are easier for God to meet, or at least we assume. And typically what I find, and again, this might just be me, is that if I lowered them enough, I might actually be the one who can make it all happen, which also in turn, and don't miss this, makes me the God of my own life. I don't need anything beyond natural to be involved in it because I'm really just serving my own wants and needs and what could happen in my life. And you didn't do that as a kid. Some of you believed that you could be a Major League Baseball player as a kid, right? Some of you thought that you were actually like Mike, right? Some of you actually believed that you could do certain things that as you progress through your life now no longer think is possible. Now, I don't know if he's in the room. If he's not, it's probably good because I'm going to embarrass him for a second. There was a specific season of my life where this was probably really apparent, and it was around our church and the way that we were going to start it. And it was kind of early on for me. We graduated college, I graduated, and then my two best friends and I, we all kind of got married around the same time. So within a couple years of each other. And so Ryan Steigel, who's on staff with us, a lot of you know Ryan, I was one of the best men in Ryan's wedding. And so he gave us all a gift because this is what you do. You buy people things. You know this when they're in your bridal party. I'm so dumb when it comes to the bridal party. Is that what you call it? So what? Everybody's laughing like, you are, in fact. You should know that, yeah. And so the thing that he got us is he got us these wallets, right? And in the wallet that he gave me, I love it. I was kind of struggling. I was kind of looking at things. I'd been hurt by a church at one point, and I was kind of struggling with some of the stuff and what God might do through me. And I'll never forget, inside the wallet, I think he did it himself. He had like hardcore like stamped or impressed on this wallet. And what he put in it was a version of this. He said, never stop dreaming. That's what he put, never stop dreaming. And I remember I opened that wallet, and I remember I was opening on the way home, he gave us his gift. And I remember being so taken back. And because for me, it was, what if I stopped dreaming that is possible simply because I've lowered the expectations for it to become a part of what I could do on my own? Like, what if I stopped dreaming that could be in the world or the way that God could use me or move through me simply because I've just practically become a person who's kind of agnostic or even atheist, even though I believe in Jesus? That when it came to the practical implications of God getting involved, that I had stepped back so far that I kind of walked away from what God might do through me. And I kept that wallet until it was literally falling apart, and now it sits in a drawer in one of my desks as a reminder of just going, there's something inside of all of us that drifts towards kind of moving away from dreaming the big dreams or praying the larger prayers when it comes to our life. And sometimes that's around unmet expectations. I put in my notes, I said this: my unmet expectations of God, or the way, that he's worked in the past, can diminish my ability to see the unlimited potential of God's power. And for many of us in the room, you got to a place in your life where you got really, really comfortable and really, really good at being a human in suburban America, and you stopped praying the kinds of prayers that were disruptive to your life or beyond your control. So I'll tell you, the way that we're wrapping up this series, and the thing that we really want to spend a little bit of time with today, I want us to reevaluate that comfort. Because most people this morning will wake up, whether they attend church or not, no matter what they do this morning, and they're living these sort of like good lives in Dublin, Ohio. And at the same time, missing such extraordinary potential what could be through a group of people who collectively believe that God could do something inside of them extraordinary and then through them in an extraordinary way. And so one of the areas that we're going to look at today, it's pretty famous in the Old Testament. We're going to be looking at a guy named Abraham, and most of you know some of his story. If you don't, I'll get you real quick caught up. Abraham, old dude, and essentially he and his wife wanted a baby. It just didn't happen. So over and over again, they wanted a baby. It just wouldn't happen. They couldn't conceive. They found themselves deeply, deeply hurt. And then we have this area of the Bible, the very first kind of collection of writings in the Bible. It's called Genesis. Genesis chapter 12, it talks about how then God shows up to this couple and says something really weird, outlandish, and extraordinary. He sets them aside. He's like, you're going to leave your home. You're going to leave everything that you know. You're going to go to the place that I send you to go. And then through you, I'm going to make a nation out of you. And not just a nation. I'm going to be like, he's going to be like, you're going to be father of many nations, and your children and your grandkids and your great-grandkids, all of them, all of this whole thing that's going on, you're going to do something extraordinary. It's going to come through you, which is really funny if you're an old man believing that God might do something extraordinary, because you're going, I know how most of this works, and this feels like it's not working that way now, and there's a clock that's ticking, bro. So if you're going to do it, you need to do it. And so between that promise and the place that we're going to look at today is well over a decade. And so for well over a decade, this couple believed that God wanted to do extraordinary things through their life, that he was going to really birth nations from their family, and at the same time, they just weren't able to have children. And so we're going to pick up Genesis 15, and I want you to sort of imagine this. This is easy to think about within like an old school context. I mean, a lot of us have thoughts around, you can picture. You've seen enough movies around this time to go, oh, maybe he had on a long thing and a big beard and he's outside in a tent. I want you as best as you can for the next few minutes to not picture this in our culture, but to picture it in the culture that was back then. So we're going to be picking it up at Genesis chapter 15. Here's what the writer says. It says, after this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. And he says this, do not be afraid. And he says this, I am your shield and your very great reward. In the language that it was written in, it would have been Hebrew. There's an emphasis here that what you're going to experience, what you're going to find isn't just what I've promised you, that there's a deep reward in it, and it's kind of centered in and nestled in this relationship that you have with me. And then Abram's response, I love, because he acknowledges who God is and then acknowledges his frustration in the midst of it. He says this, he says, sovereign Lord, or God who's able to do anything or over all things, God, you are directing things, sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. And I love this. He's very, very clear of the problem that's at hand. And I don't know, Eliezer, I'm just saying it didn't seem like they were super close, right? Like it seems what's coming next is that guy is actually the one who's going to take over everything that I have. We said this last week. It's kind of like your golf clubs thing. Like some of you play golf and one day you're not going to be here anymore. Somebody's going to own your golf clubs and they're going to play golf better than you did, right? Like that's kind of what he's feeling right here. He's like, I don't even know how to pass all of this down to. And there was a promise and a gap between the promise and when all of this was happening. And the temptation is to look at God and go, God, you simply didn't come through for me. And because you didn't come through, I'm like through with all of that when it comes to the promise. Since you didn't come through, I'm through with that. And you begin to distance yourself. And what we find here is that not he just stopped believing or stopped interacting with God. He just kind of questioning whether it's even possible that God would do something extraordinary through him that he had promised that he would do. And so Abram's response is, he said, look, you've given me no children. So a servant in my household will be my heir. And now, I love this, because some of you were taught up that you were super respectful when you prayed and everything was like, but he's going after God. You made a promise to me that you didn't keep. You did something that you said you were going to do, and you don't seem to be able to hold through on that. How in the world can you do what you said you were going to do if I to remain childless? And here's what I love about this beautiful sort of narrative between God and Abraham is that you find a man who sees the current reality and bases his thoughts around that current reality. Essentially, he just has this limited perspective on everything that's around him. And I'll tell you this, right? This is just really blunt and pretty honest. This is most people that wake up. Is my perspective is limited to the small world that I'm currently seeing and in. But what happens when that gets deeply disrupted and your belief is that God could do actually more? So the writer goes on, he says this, and the word of the Lord came to him, being Abram, and said this man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. And I love what happens next. This is where it's so important for you to like picture this, not within 2021, but in this context. He's probably not living in a 4-bedroom house. He's probably in this little hut, tent sort of thing, or this cave sort of thing. And at least for me, and again, this is kind of taking a little bit of a stretch, but I imagine that he's having this sort of argument with God, kind of indoors. And so what happens next is so powerful. It says this, or I says this, that he was then led outside, or that God took him outside. That he takes him outside of this area that he would have been in to see things differently. He took him outside and he says this, I want you to look up at the sky and then I want you to count the stars. Now, this is one of my favorite things to do. We do this every time we talk about stars. So we're going to do this for a second. I want to dim the lights. I want to put up this picture for a second. When you see stars and you begin to count them and you can actually see them clearly, there's something about us that just experiences awe and wonder. Right? And then you begin to understand this, that the world is continuing to expand and expand even more and more. Like it's this endless sort of expansion of things that are way beyond your grasp. And God pulls Abraham out here. He's like, I want you to look at that. I want you to look at the infinite that is beyond you. And I want you to see the world through that lens. Not through the lens of you didn't get a parking spot at Target when you were going shopping. Not through the lens of, you not getting your 1% or 2% or 3% raise this year. Not through the lens of I didn't get what I wanted or I walked through this relationship that essentially. Not through all of those things that are part of your world that are important but are small. I want you to see the world through this expansive perspective that goes beyond you. Let's bring the lights back up real quick. I want you to see the world through that lens. And he takes him outside of wherever he was. He said, I want you to look at the stars. And he says this, if indeed you can count them, which you can't, then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Or that is to say, you will not just have a son, you will be a person who experiences the world through many nations coming through your family. And that's what happened. That through this couple, God kept his promise even after years and years of silence, even after years and years of unmet expectations, even after years and years of him having a very limited perspective at times. God takes him out there and says, this is what is to come. And then God is faithful on his promises. And God expanded his perspective. Now, some of you in the room, you've walked away from a lot of this type of thinking because you've been hurt, because you've had unmet expectations of people or even the church or of God. And here's what I just wish. I wish that we could find ourselves back at a place that the New Testament talks about, like in this childlike sort of faith and wonder. That you're not confined to all of the smallness of your life, but that you actually find yourself in a way of thinking and being in the world that's continually expansive of the possibilities that are in front of you. But in my notes, I said this way. I said, never measure God's unlimited potential against your limited perspective. And what would happen if we lived our lives in a way where we just assumed right out the gate that there could be more on the other side of what we actually see right now? Then what would it be like if you were able to look out over the next 10 years or 20 years or 30 years or 40 years or the legacy that you're gonna leave with your family and your kids and all these sorts of things, and it wasn't limited by all of the things that you had been hurt by, or all of the things that you struggled with, or all of the doubts that you had, or the things that you felt like you could control but couldn't control. And for some of you in the room, you talk about deconstruction all the time and reconstruction. What if your thinking of God wasn't so limited to the way that the church had hurt you in the past, but that what God might do through you to build something more beautiful in the future? What if your hang up in relationships wasn't so tethered to something or a person who would hurt you 10 years ago, but that it was actually that you found freedom to believe in something that could be beyond you or beyond you in your relationships moving forward? Some of you when it comes to finance, we can talk about this in a few minutes. Some of you when it comes to your financial sort of thing, some of you are so tethered to what is right now and you don't even feel like you can move because you feel paralyzed in the midst of it. But what would happen is if you were able to see endless possibilities moving forward as you followed God into making those steps forward. What does that look like? Now, the next line that I'm going to show you, I really wish it didn't rhyme, and I really wish it wasn't cheesy, but it is both of those things. So I'm going to tell you right off the bat. Now, I say that right off the bat for two reasons. Number one, it's probably more memorable that way, but number two, every part of me as a speaker dies when I put this on the screen. So as long as we both know that, we're good. Now, the reason I want to put this up here is because I want this to be the assumption that you walk through your life with. Most people won't do that, but the people who do experience a completely different life when it comes to faith. So here's the overly cheesy rhyming statement. Here it is, ready? God multiplies the seeds that he provides. Pow, fire me now. That's great. But here's why this matters, right? Here's why this matters. If you think about your life, when it comes to all of the small prayers that you've prayed or believed God for, that sometimes there's like an unmet expectation. You can look at that and go, even if he were to answer this small prayer, the only thing that would come out would just be this one sort of flower or this one sort of thing that might grow. But the people who experience the kind of faith that moves them or propels them forward to see the world differently is that God has the capacity and the power to take one small seed and multiply it out in so many different ways. We see Jesus in the New Testament. You see these couple of accounts of Jesus taking a boy who had a little bit of food, right? And multiplying that out with thousands of people. And everybody gets so wrapped up in like, was it real? Was it not? Is it food? Is it story true? But at the heart of this is that the God of the universe takes the little bit that we bring and multiplies those Chick-fil-A sandwiches all over the place. You know what I mean? With no pickles and American cheese, right? Like, that he's able to take the small things that we bring and multiply them out. Now, there's one really like tangible example of this. I love it. And I'm going to show you a couple pictures around this. I'm going to tell you, some of you may have heard this before. If not, this will be fun. This is the Atacama Desert. Let me show you this. The driest desert in the world is in Chile. And this is what it looks like on like any given day. In fact, now, this is so fascinating for me, it's the driest place on earth. And according to some of these articles, the climate is so dry that scientists now are using this area of the world to gain insight into what life and living conditions might be on Mars. It is that dry. They are sending scientists out there to do this. I think this is so fascinating. Now, it doesn't receive a lot of rain, and by that I mean hardly any ever. And every year, there's these like seeds that get scattered just because, but nothing ever happens with them because there's no rain, there's no precipitation enough for anything to really grow. But something interesting happened in 2015, right? After 7 years of almost no rain, all of a sudden something happened. In a 12-hour period, this is so fascinating, a 12-hour period, there was so much rain in this desert that scientists say that it was equivalent in a 12-hour period of 7 years worth of rain in this area of the world, which is the driest area in the world. And all of a sudden, the ground that looked like this day after day after day, and the place in the world that was known as the place where there's no flowers, there's no bloom, there's none of that. All of a sudden, after 7 years worth of rain packed into a 12-hour period, looked like this. And people were baffled by it. And it stayed this way just for a few months, right? And people during this time, you should Google this. They would go, you see like people like frolicking through the forest. It's like, people got all kinds of crazy. It was like a tourist destination for these few months that had happened, and they call it a super bloom. And all of these seeds that had been there, and every year they would kind of come and then nothing would happen. All of a sudden, in this 12-hour period, this massive amount of rain, it just all bloomed at the same time. Now, there's a part of me, and again, some of you are not like this, but if you're like me, I see that desert day in and day out, and my default assumption is that this is how it will be again and again and again. And my default assumption is that when I look at those kinds of spaces, I gotta just assume that's just how it is. And then all of a sudden, something happens that disrupts all of that. And you find deep, extraordinary amounts of beauty that are beyond any of our sense of control. You see this in nature all the time. You see this in so many different places. But when it comes to our lives, when it comes to our spiritual lives, this is kind of the last thing that often sort of takes shape when it comes to this principle. A question for you is, the prayers that you've prayed and finally like maybe grown tired of praying year after year, are you a person who gives up on that because it feels like there's no answer? Or are you a person who still can look forward and say there is possibility within the depth of this sort of ongoing dried up seed that just feels like it's in the ground and not doing anything? Are you the kind of person who inherently and deeply in your heart believes that God can take something really, really small and actually multiply it out to do something extraordinary? You're the type of person who comes across Jesus' miracle in the New Testament and goes, that doesn't happen. Or are you the type of person that goes, no, God actually can do things that are beyond you? And my hope is this: no matter where you are on the faith spectrum, no matter where you are on, kind of deconstructing or reconstructing, no matter if you've been to church ever since you were like 5 years old with flannel graphs and the whole deal, VBS, all of it, and now you find yourself like here going, I don't know what to think, or you've been a follower of Jesus so long, wherever we are on that, the question that I think we have to like deeply wrestle through is, do you believe that God can multiply the things in your life that are small? Do you believe that in your parenting, that God can take the small moments like tucking your kids into bed at night, right, and praying with them, and multiply that out to do something extraordinary in their life and their heart and in the direction that they go? Or are you the type of person who looks, like we talked about your finances earlier, and believes that God can take the little that you have or the large parts that you have and multiply that out to do something significant? The other part, come on. Some of you in the room, you're entrepreneurs who are not starting anything. Like, do you believe that God could do something extraordinary through your ability to simply lean in and trust Him to move through you? Some of you in the room, you know this. You're extraordinarily wealthy. You've done extraordinarily well. Do you believe that God could take what he's given you and your stewardship and do something through all of that for the kingdom? As a person who gives time, I love talking to people about this when it comes to like serving. Do you believe that God can take the small amounts of time that you do and extrapolate that over time to do something extraordinary through your life and your influence? Do you believe that? So, this is the thing that I want you to remember, and then we're going to wrap up here in just a second. I never want you to find yourself in a place where you measure God's unlimited potential against your limited perspective. And I'll tell you what we've been praying throughout this series. We're talking about all the stuff that we're doing here. We're talking about the initiative, and we'll hit that in a second. But what I hope more than anything else for you is that when it comes to all of the parts of your life that you grip so tightly, that you find yourself opening your hand up and saying, God, take all of it, and then God, do something with the things that I give you and multiply that out to do something significant. All right, so here's what I'm gonna ask you to do. If you would, I'd love for you to pull out the card that's under your seat. We've been talking about this for a while, so if you're here, I'd love for you to pull that card out. If you would, I think you have a pen around as well. Let me tell you what this is about. And so if you're brand new, this is kind of one of those fun like family moments that you're like, hey, I'm brand new, and this may or may not be for me. It's not for you. But if you've been around our church for a little bit, and you've heard us talk about this over the course of the series, we've talked about the principle that we just talked about and several others in the context of generosity, and specifically, God, what would you do through us as a church as we come together collectively to do something extraordinary together? And I'll tell you what I've been praying and what we've asked you to be praying for us as a family, what we've been praying about is, God, if we were gonna sacrifice specifically financially to see things come about in the world, what would that look like and what would you do through us? And we've asked you to pray in faith for the last 4 weeks and to come back today. So I'm so glad that you came back. I was really curious if anybody would even come today. So I'm super glad that you're here. If you forgot today was this day, don't leave. You can just fade out in the last song. It'd be great. No, I'm totally kidding. Please don't do that. Please don't do that. Anyway, so, but for us, what we're saying is like, hey, we came to this day saying, hey, God, what would you do through us? And we've asked you to pray about it. And I've gotten so many texts and I've gotten several phone calls too from people going, hey, here's what we thought we were going to do week one, but God's expanded our perspective. We really feel like we're going to sacrifice in these ways to see this happen. I had one conversation recently with somebody. These are always so fun. This is like the low-hanging fruit, and I love it. They're like, I have like a $7 coffee every day, and they multiply that out. Like, I know that I could at least cut that in half, which I thought was so funny. I don't even know that I could cut it in half, but I love that some people can. But they're like, that's one way that I could do that, and we talked about that. And so I want you to pull this out. When we pull this out, for those of you who've been for a while, I said we put these boxes on here for a reason. The reason that we put the boxes on here is because most of us gravitate towards one of these boxes over the course of the year. If you call Nuvo home or you're involved in giving, one of these boxes stood out as like, oh, that's the comfortable box. And what I asked you to do is to pray about what would it look like if you just said, God, what would it look like for me to move one box up or two boxes up, whatever that looks like. And I'll tell you, at least for our family, there was a box on here that we had, and I was like, I felt good about that. And then we talked about it in the van, and then I felt less good about that after talking to my wife, because she's much better than me and much more spiritual. So for us, we were like, hey, what does that look like? And so we shifted things, at least in our family. And so what we asked you to do over the last 4 weeks is to pray about that. And so today is the day for us as a church where we're going to come together and we're going to say, hey, collectively, this is what we want to do over the course of the next year. Now, you've heard me talk about this, and I'll hit it one more time. There's 3 specific initiatives that we're focusing on. The first one is our church and starting a church here in Columbus. So we're about 10 weeks old. This is what it looks like for us. These are the things that we're focusing on financially, creating an irresistible space for our children, right? So over here, your kids are over here. How do we make that an engaging, incredibly engaging space, and then dream about what it looks like to help children along the way, ask the kind of questions so that by the time they get to high school, they actually aren't just dumbfounded by a philosophy teacher who goes, there's 2 creation accounts and everything falls apart, right? How do we help equip kids and students in that way? And so that's one of the things we're focusing on. The second one is a digital front door for the people of Columbus. Most people will watch us online before they come to a service. So how do we create an incredible space for people digitally? And the last one is an opportunity fund, and you heard us talk about this. For us, we know that in Dublin, it's kind of hard to find property or a space, and we could try to tackle that sort of thing when it comes, or we could say, hey, we're going to invest in that right now. We're going to be ready for that. I think I said this the very first week. That's the least sexy things of all the things that we're going to talk about, and also one of the most important things that we can do when it comes to stewardship and wisdom with our church. And we want to be ready for that. So those are 3 things we're focusing on here. Nationally, what we're focusing on is really supporting another church plant. So for us, we're always going to be focused on this. We're always going to be giving to other church plants. But I introduced you to my friend Carlos, and this is Reality Church in Miami. They launched a week before we did. And so I love telling people this. They're like, wait a minute, aren't you guys in the same boat? Yeah, aren't you guys like have similar, strategic partners that are helping you launch? Absolutely. And we're going to help fund church plants across the country. Churches in areas of the country that need churches who are focused on creating space for people with doubts, questions about faith. Carlos is doing this in Miami. They're doing a remarkable job already. And so we just want to pour resources into that church as well. And then you heard me talk about this. This has been on my heart for years now. It's an organization called Our Daughters International. So we're always going to be focusing on something globally as well. I met the leader of this movement, is really what it is. His name is Ramesh, years ago. It was the first time that I ever looked at somebody and was like, you are just like a legend, you know what I mean? And so Ramesh, he's extraordinary. What they're doing is they line people up on the border of Nepal as sex trafficking is happening and crossing the border, and they're lining it with women who help stop that actually at the border before they ever cross the lines. And the girls that come out of that, they're then resourcing to have jobs, and they're resourcing to be able to move forward and being entrepreneurs and be able to be self-sustaining. And they're doing it extraordinarily well. The other thing that I love that they're doing, especially because I'm an Enneagram 8, is they're also figuring out ways to, within these countries, prosecute the people who are moving these women across the border. They're actually involved in the justice initiatives on the other side of it, which is extraordinary to watch and extraordinary to see how it's happening, right? And we want to be a part of that. So we're going to support Ramesh. We've already sliced off a percentage of what we're going to be doing, and we're going to be giving that away to Ramesh and his team. Now, those are the 3 initiatives that we're focused on over the course of the next year. And so what we've asked you to do over the last several weeks is to pray about what God would have you to do. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to take these cards out. I'm going to ask you to take a pen out. I'm going to invite the band to come back up. We're going to wrap up here in just a few minutes. But I want you to take out the card and the pen. If you call Nuvo home, what I want you to do is I want you to fill this out. Now, we've been asking you to pray about this for a while. So I know for a lot of you, this is easy. You've already discussed it and that sort of thing. So I'm going to ask you to fill this out. And there's 2 types of you in the room, and we said this from week 1. There are those of you in the room who believe in what we're doing here and are invested here and want to invest in this place. And we want that generosity. We want you to experience generosity in that way. And then there are some of you, and we said this from week 1, who go, I just don't know if I even trust the local church. I struggle with the church. I don't know about that. I mean, this is a fun place, but I'm not sure where I'm at on that. But what we also said is we believe that generosity matters in every single person's life. So even if you don't give here, I think you should slice off a percentage of your income and go give it somewhere that's making a difference, right? And so we said that right out the gate, and I meant that. I meant that. What I hope for every person in this room is over the course of the next year that you give sacrificially somewhere to the point that you feel it. So what I want you to do is I want you to pull out these cards, and I'm going to ask you for the next just minute or so, I want you to fill this out. And then after you do, we're going to fold it up. And I think we have these boxes. We're going to bring these boxes up to, we'll do that. But I'm going to ask you to do something, especially if you're giving here and you're a part of our church. What I want you to do is I want you to fill this out, and I want you to pledge over the course of the next year what you're going to do financially here, right? And so we've asked you to pray about it. We've asked you to check these boxes. Now, some of you are like, hey, I'm already giving. Should I put that on here? Absolutely. I want you to put like what it is that you're already kind of committed to, and then if you're going to expand that, great. I want you to put that on here. But really, as a church and collectively as both individuals and who we are as a body, this is what I hope. I hope this is like a moment for us to kind of put a stake in the ground, to say this is what we're going to do together over the course of the next year. And what we're going to do is we're going to plan accordingly. You're going to get to hear from the people that we put up on the screen. You'll hear from Carlos. You're going to get to hear a little bit from Ramesh. You're going to see these sorts of things play out as we move forward. And you're going to see tangibly what happens at our church as we continue to grow and give together. So just for a second, I want you to pull out these cards. I want you to fill it out. I want you to write what you're pledging to give. You can click. You can't click the card. You can't do that. You can't. But you can check off like weekly, monthly, or annually what you're planning on doing. And I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to take these cards, and what we're going to do is we're going to go, hey, we're going to plan out some of what we're going to be doing over the next year based off of what you put on this card, all right? And so what we're gonna do is I want you to fill it out. I want you to close it up like that. And then we're gonna do a song, and the song that Fatima is gonna lead us in is a song called Goodness of God. And so as we do that, I'm gonna ask you to fold it up, and there's 2 boxes, one on each sort of aisle. What I'm gonna ask you to do is fold it up. I'm gonna ask you to put it in there. Now, the one group that I mentioned earlier, they're like, I believe in giving, or maybe I've even stretched in giving, but I don't know that I'm gonna give to a local church yet. That's great. Here's what I would love for you to do, especially if you're somebody who still attends our church. I would love for you to write on here, hey, I am in, you don't have to put how much, but I'm committed to this percentage of my income, and I'm gonna give it somewhere, but not here. And I want you to mark that and put it on, like, hey, I'm gonna give it somewhere, but not here. And we wanna celebrate that with you too. Like, we just wanna say, hey, some people are taking next steps in their faith and giving, even if it's not here, and we wanna celebrate that with you. So I'm gonna ask you to fill out the card. Hopefully I've given you enough time at this point. I feel like I could just keep talking in circles, and then you could just do that, or we could do it together. I want you to fill out the card. As we sing this song together, I'm gonna ask you to fold it, then I'm gonna ask you to put it in one of these boxes, and then we'll wrap up our time together. Let me pray for us. I'm gonna ask you to stand. Let me pray for us. We'll put these cards in the boxes, and then we'll wrap up from there. Go ahead and stand up, let me pray. Father, we thank you so much for what you're doing in the life of our church. We thank you that we get to be a part of it. Guys, we talked about today, my hope is that for these next few moments that we're together, that this is really like a stake in the ground for some of us. For many of us, this is like a sacrificial moment that we know that we're putting a number down on a card. And we actually know how hard that's gonna be over the course of next year. We feel that. God, thank you so much for that. And we ask that you would show up tangibly in all of our lives so that we can see you working through it. And God, I pray that you would help us to move forward in faith in those moments. God, I pray for the person who's never, ever given, especially to a local church before, and that this feels like a stretch for them. God, thank you for that step. And God, we just ask that as they take that step, that you would meet them so tangibly in those moments as well. And God, that they would sense you in a powerful way moving through their lives financially as they do that. And God, we just pray that for every single person in this room, if we haven't found like a plan of generosity in our lives, God, that you would help us to step out and do that. God, hopefully that's today. Hopefully today is the day that we all put a stake in the ground and choose generosity. But God, even if it's not today, for the person who it might not be today for, God, I ask that would come soon, so they could experience the freedom on the other side of that generosity. God, we love you so much. We thank you for what you're doing, and we thank you for what we're able to do because of the generosity of so many people in this room. So in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So you can take your cards, I ask you to fold them up, and you can go to either side of the aisle. There's boxes right over there.